SoundCartel.
From SoundCartel, I'm Nicole Goodman, and this is Business Essentials Daily. What do you think about changing to a 4-day work week? It's certainly been the subject of a lot of recent public discussion. Aaron McEwen, VP of Research and Advisory at Gartner, says while there's overwhelming evidence of the benefits, a 4-day work week doesn't suit all businesses. But it might be worth a try. Aaron lays out the evidence to Jeff Waters.
The overwhelming evidence that's been collected to date would suggest that there are very positive indications or signals that experimenting with a 4-day work week can have a very positive impact on businesses from a productivity, performance, engagement, attraction of critical talent. All of those things certainly stand true. But it's not for everyone, and it's not for all companies, and it probably doesn't work for all segments of all workforces. So there's a couple of, core principles if you're considering a 4-day work week or a reduced working week, however it might be, that, and it's important to say that it's not just about 4-day work weeks. And that is that you probably want to make sure that it fits the type of work that your workforce does. We at Gartner recommend a kind of crawl, walk, run approach. So, trial and experimentation, look for minimum viable products, so to speak, so that you might trial it in a section of your business to see what the impact is before you go ahead and kind of make the big decision to scale it out, because it does come with its own disruption, as any change to the workforce does.
How on earth does working fewer hours increase productivity? It just doesn't seem to match.
Well, this gets into, is the work we do productive? And there is a, very large growing body of evidence that a significant proportion of the work that we do is not particularly valuable. It's work for work's sake. And there's certainly a very large body of evidence that suggests that there is very little correlation between time spent at a desk and value created. So that's the first thing I'll say. The second thing I'll say is that we are, for multiple reasons, facing a significant well-being, burnout and mental health crisis at work. We are looking at record low levels of well-being and mental health, and burnout is rife, particularly across sectors that are understaffed, that are under-resourced and need to deliver, more work than there are people to deliver it. So the way that a 4-day work week or a reduced work week tends to work is in a couple of ways. Firstly, people have more energy because they're able to take a significant break and disconnect from work. And so when you think about just how much of our economy is driven by what I would call knowledge work, so knowledge work is really about cognitive output. And so in order to produce high quality cognitive work, you actually need to be well rested. And so one of the things that we know over the last, 40 to 50 years is that, the 38-hour work week, I don't know anyone that works 38 hours a week, right? So even during the COVID period, depending upon which source you cite, it's anywhere between 7 to 12 additional hours per week that people were working during that period. And there's no indication that that has reduced since then. So if we take those numbers, 7 to 12 hours per week, maybe a 4-day work week is really just setting us back to where we were, which is a traditional 5-day work week. So that's part of the challenge, is that people are generally overworked. And of course, now we have, the last conversation that you and I had was about return to office mandates, right? And so with those return to office, we're now adding the commute back into this increased number of hours that people are spending at work anyway. I don't know anyone that says, gee, I wish I worked more. So if we think about it from the context of whether it's physically draining labor or knowledge work, there's a question of energy and attentional focus that has a direct link to the quality of work that we deliver. So the 4-day work week or reduced hours appears to make a pretty significantly positive impact on your ability to turn up to work and deliver quality.
It all sounds like something that a big business human resources department could work through and set up, new systems. But for a small business, this might be awfully difficult to achieve. Is that true?
I probably couldn't disagree more on that one.
Please go ahead. Explain why.
Well, when you think about what's required to introduce a 4-day work week across an organization that has, say, 30,000 employees, that's a massive undertaking. We're talking about the reconfiguration of not just the structure of work, but the roles, the deployment, the systems that support it, which is why we suggest, crawl, walk, run. It's a big undertaking. What I would say for small businesses is that it's a lot simpler. If you're dealing with 12 employees, it's relatively easy to kind of roll that out and say, well, let's just kind of trial it for a couple of weeks and see what impact it has. And that's not going to lead to kind of significant impact on your customer base or your operations. And I would say that small businesses have been doing this forever. It's part of why people join small businesses, because it's like, well, I need to duck out and pick up my kids, or, hey, I've got to take the kids on a footy trip over the weekend and we need to leave on Friday. These are things that in small businesses, employees negotiate with their employers all the time. And I would argue it's part of the fabric of operating a small business, is that kind of mutual level of trust and give and take. That's actually quite difficult to scale. So I think, straight away, small businesses are at a significant advantage to be able to introduce it, trial it, tweak it, and make sure it works for them and their customers and their operations. And by the way, the other thing I'm going to say is, concepts like a 9-day fortnight or fly in, fly out, these have been embedded into the Australian workplace for decades and decades. So this is not a new concept by any means. And there are multiple examples of it working effectively. However, one of the things I will say is we don't really know what the long-term impact of a 4-day work week is. So certainly the data that we've collected to date is positive. There's a direct kind of correlation at least, but always remember, correlation doesn't equal causation. But certainly there's a strong correlation between a 4-day work week and increased engagement, productivity, performance, and it's a very attractive or a very strong attractor of good talent. So if you're a small business that's in a competitive market and you start offering a 4-day work week, you can expect that you might have access to the better talent in that market. So that can provide a very immediate advantage to a small business. What we don't know is the longer term. So there hasn't been really much in the way of longitudinal studies. So one of the things that I worry about, and it's interesting, I had a chat recently with one of the pioneers of 4-day work week in the world, one of the very first companies to experiment with it. And they were starting to kind of see that, initially what was seen as a bit of a gift or an offering to the workforce, a few years down the track, it was no longer thought of that way. It was more of like, this is just how we do work now. So I think that's something that we'll have to monitor over time is, does it become a bit like a hygiene issue? It's now entitlement or an expectation. And does that continue to deliver the same sharp, significant positive results that we've seen to date? So that's an open question that I don't think we have an answer to yet.
That's Aaron McEwen, Vice President of Research and Advisory at Gartner. This episode of Business Essentials Daily is produced by the team at SoundCartel. Thanks for listening. I'm Nicole Goodman. We'll bring you more Be Daily tomorrow. Follow @BE Daily Podcast across social media and head to bedaily.com.au for more from the Business Essentials Daily podcast. SoundCartel.